You're listening to Mr. Credit on San Diego 1700 with local credit expert Derek Evans. Now, live in studio, Mr. Credit.
Well, welcome to Mr. Credit. We are live and local here in San Diego, bringing you the most important hour in radio and telling you everything that they don't want you to know about consumer credit scoring. The banks, the bureaus, and the government's in there now, too, dissecting the truth for you out of the headlines that you read that are almost all completely misleading and false. Padres still in first place by 2 full games after losing to the Cardinals last night, 8-3. We're in town again tonight against Washington, 7 o'clock. You can listen to all the Padres games right here on San Diego 1700 if you can't make it down to Petco tonight. 7 p.m. tonight against Washington. Make sure you save this station in your dial. Today we're going to be talking about some fresh credit news. There's some interesting stuff in here. If you're a business owner, you have to listen. There's something really interesting coming out from the FTC that everyone's got to know about. It's some crazy stuff, actually. I'm going to be getting to more emails, finishing up the top 10 myths from earlier this week, and I have another story from you from Automated Injustice. But first, let's get to this. If you're a business owner, you got to listen to this. So this is a story. It says, do you comply with FTC's new red flag rule? So this financial overhaul, it's a sweeping legislation. It covers so much stuff. It's very difficult. I mean, you could spend all day trying to decipher this stuff and still not know exactly what's going on. So if you're out there and you haven't paid any attention to it at all, this is something you really got to know about. So it reads this. Regulations to help prevent identity theft, they go into effect on June 1st. Now, this is good for everyone who, is a consumer out there. I mean, the idea of trying to prevent identity theft is something that needs to happen because it's obviously too rampant, as we've seen that recently with some political figures and even the CEO of LifeLock getting his identity stolen more than a dozen times. So this stuff goes into effect June 1st, and chances are you've got some work to do if you want to comply with it. So here are the things that we need to know. You may not have even heard of this red flag rule, but there's a good chance by June 1st you'll need to comply with it. The rule requires businesses that are potential targets for identity thieves have to develop plans to spot fraud, red flags, and prevent them. So they're putting the onus a little bit here on businesses that contain this type of information. So if you're a business that takes down people's social security numbers, addresses, full legal names, phone numbers, if you have their credit reports, if you're taking their credit card numbers, anything like that, you're going to actually have to develop a rule or a set of rules called red flags that can help you identify who might be at risk for having their identity stolen. So if you think the rule only applies to financial institutions, think again. It requires all creditors to comply with the rules. But the definition of a creditor is very broad and includes businesses or organizations, quote, businesses or organizations that regularly provide goods and services first and allow customers to pay later. That is kind of like the whole thing that goes on in the business world, isn't it? I mean, vendors bring product by, then they invoice you. You go see an attorney, they sit down with you, maybe they draw up some documents for you, they do it, then they invoice you. Well, technically, according to this rule, that means that they are now technically creditors. And that's really true. I mean, it's true they are creditors, but for the sake of this law, it's a little bit silly. At the same time, anyone who's accepting credit, and that's what anyone who's doing, who's performing the service now and having to pay later, they fall under this legislation. So there is a frequently asked questions guide, and you can find this. You can go to ftc.gov if you want to search out the FAQ. But you could be forgiven for hoping the government will change the enforcement deadline, considering it's already been extended several times since the original date of November 2008. But, of course, that won't excuse you from complying. And just having some rules, written or unwritten, about not leaving customer information lying around will not get you off the hook. Okay, you have to have a written policy and procedures specifically to handle it. So here's a quote from the co-founder of the Informational Law Group. I suspect a lot of small businesses were hoping this ultimately wouldn't happen. This is from Tanya Forsheet. She's the co-founder of the Informational Law Group, a Los Angeles firm that advises businesses on privacy and data security. If you're taking credit card numbers, you have to already go through quite a few hoops for PCI compliance anyway. But I think the thing that's most important if you're a small business owner here, number one, if you don't have a business attorney or someone who's helping you with your contracts, with the information that you're potentially storing, or anything along those lines, I have the right person for you. Dan Kehr, Kehr Law, Kehr law.com. Okay, you can call Dan 619-823-8230. You want him to review your contracts. He can probably help you figure out a way to insulate yourself from this as much as possible by engaging in contracts with the people who you do business with or who the vendors that you're using are. The old handshake rule, or we'll drop the product off and send you the invoice, is not a good idea anymore. Okay? June 1st is Tuesday. In case you didn't know, I know everybody's out of town right now or on the way out of town, for the Memorial Day weekend. But this is something that you're going to have to get on first thing Tuesday when you come back. Call Dan Kehr, 619-823-8230. It's kind of scary. And this is the problem with when you start getting legislation out the wazoo, which is what we've got right now. It can start to affect way more people than maybe it's even intended to affect, and that's when you have problems occur. So we'll see. June 1st is Tuesday. They haven't set it back since then, so oh well. Speaking of the government...
But we have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
The U.S. actually sold 20% of its shares in Citigroup. Now remember, I'm always trying to tie back in so you can understand the full circle of how this stuff works. You have the credit bureaus, okay, who are there for the banks. They exist only because the banks are trying to make quick decisions about lending, because lending over and over, boom, 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 that's how they make money. It's not the old days where they did a loan and they were happy for 30 years while they collected the payment, or 10 years or 5 years or however long it was. They move that stuff around, sell it to each other, and package it up and send to servicers and things like that. So they have to constantly be doing business in order to make money. So that's why the bureaus exist. Okay. Now you have the government owning a significant amount of many of the banks, including Citi, and you also have the chairperson for TransUnion sitting on the board, President Obama's Board of Economic Advisors. So there's a hand-holding that's going on there that we have to pay very close attention to, especially if laws start getting tilted towards the bureaus. Because right now, it's a joke out there. I mean, it's a joke. The bureaus aren't doing anything the way they're supposed to. They're supposed to conduct a reasonable investigation when you dispute an item. They are not doing that. They will scan the letter you send them, send it overseas, and have someone who doesn't speak the language look at it. That person will decipher it into 4 or 5 different codes in the eOscar system, and they will then ship it off to the next person for an electronic verification. They're not doing anything the way they're supposed to. So the fact that TransUnion might be in bed with the president, not a good thing. But this did happen this week. The U.S. Treasury sold 20% of its shares of Citigroup, which is, this is for us, right? This is our money that the Treasury is running around with. So they sold 1.5 billion shares of Citigroup. That was only 20%. So we can do the quick math there and know that we still own 6 billion shares of Citigroup. 6 billion shares of Citigroup, or about 1/5 of its holdings to profit. We actually sold it for a profit. So the Treasury sold it for a profit of $1.3 billion. At that rate, the government stands to make about $6.6 billion on its entire investment in Citigroup. After Wednesday's sale, the Treasury owns 22% of the company still. So they sold it for a profit, $1.3 billion. Brooke, when do you think we're going to get the checks for that? Do you think they're going to you think they're going to mail the checks out to us? The checks are in the mail. Yeah, so don't expect to see a piece of that. Just remember how much money has been printed. We were talking about $1 trillion almost every time they meet. $1 trillion. A billion is only 1/1000th of a trillion. So the $1.3 billion in profit that they made is only 1/1000th of just one of those trillions of dollars that we're in deficit for. And we're in deficit for double-digit trillions. So while it sounds good, it is a drop in the bucket, if that. In fact, that bucket that just dropped into is so dusty that it just vanished. I mean, that's the sad part. The good news is we didn't lose money on the deal, and we are backing out of it. But this is what I mean when I tell you that the government has to unwind these things from the credit markets, and when they do that, it shifts the parallels completely. So if the government is going in there and unwinding or selling off all the stuff that they've bought, it starts to turn the markets around, and it changes the way that credit works, because the market will get scared when they see the government selling. They'll want out. They know there's a big seller, a huge seller, billions of shares. Why would you want to be long or buying in the market where there's a huge seller like that? You wouldn't. So it can really turn things against us, and if that happens, the credit markets will get even tighter. That's why it's so important to understand where your credit's at.